Welcome to the fifth webinar of the program dedicated to advancing your already relatively advanced Qidao skills. This particular module of our program is also going to dive deeper into the exploration of pain body healing, the modality that I developed over the years, loosely based on the teachings of Eckhart Tolle, the well-known author of such best-selling books as The Power of Now and The New Earth. As you probably heard me mentioning it before, I consider that Eckhart Tolle did a really good job popularizing the term pain body to the millions of his readers. Unfortunately, he never provided enough methods for healing pain body. So I decided to pick up right where Eckhart left off and develop the whole modality of pain body healing that I also want to share with you in the context of our program. The reason why I keep this modality till the very end of our apprenticeship is so that you have a very solid foundation, and also it's something that you will continue deepening and exploring on your own, or if you continue apprenticing to me. So what happens in our program is that you are going to dive into the principles of pain body healing. And of course, we'll also start looking at some of the practical applications. And it's going to be up to you how many people you manage to help heal their pain bodies. And that is going to determine how much training on the job you're receiving. That's right. To become a certified Qigong coach, it's required for you to have 50 documented coaching sessions under your belt. And in order to invite people to receive your coaching sessions, one of the easy ways to do that is to just tell people that you would help them heal their pains. Pretty much everybody, or at least 99% of adults, suffer from some degree of chronic or acute pain. So they experience pain on a consistent basis, or it happens sporadically. Either way, there must be some reasons for pain. If the person did not experience an injury or some other type of accident, then most likely it's a pain associated with chronic tension. And if this tension is not causing chronic pain, like regular pain, it may still compromise certain parts of the body. The chain breaks at the weakest link, as they say, which means if a particular part of the body or several parts have been exposed to undue tension over a period of time, they get depleted of energy because energy doesn't flow easily through tense areas or tissues of the body. They also may be depleted in terms of nutrition and oxygen for exact same reason. The blood doesn't flow freely through areas of tension. They also may be stiff and feel irritated. So in other words, they're constantly communicating with the central nervous system that something is wrong. And central nervous system often will send them more signals to contract. So those parts of the body basically end up adding insult to injury, so to speak, tensing up more and more. That leads to kind of a downward spiral in terms of health and wellness. What we do is to help people experience the upward spiral, spiraling towards greater health and well-being. And we do that by reversing the attitude towards pain body. That's right. Whenever people read Eckhart Tolle's books, they develop the attitude towards pain body that it's just a really bad thing that needs to get rid of. Well, that's the way that Eckhart described it in his books. And unfortunately, because most people don't like pain, and most people don't want to be constantly subjected to the flaring of pain bodies, they literally choose to perceive that as something bad. And living in a relatively linear, dualistic realm, most people put a label that this is bad, it needs to be destroyed, get rid of, fixed, or somehow else negated. So they try to get rid of their pain bodies. Well, the funny thing is the pain body is not a bad thing. It's the dream body that is trying to reveal something to the person, something that would potentially enlighten them or empower them to step on a different path in their lives. It's just simply has been struggling against the flow. The reason why it's been struggling against the flow is most likely in the person's psyche. Their beliefs, their values, their sense of identity contribute to the tendency to struggle against the flow. Of course, the dream body is going to revolt against that. So, instead of trying to suppress the pain body, we actually study it. And as we study, we begin to understand better why it does what it does, and also discover some wisdom from the interaction with the pain body. What's most beautiful about this approach is that it's non-violent. We're not trying to suppress a part of ourselves that is bad, or we're not trying to cut it out and throw it away. If you realize that in the world of dreaming, you are one with the whole world, where are you going to cut that part out and throw it away? You're one with the universe. So there is no other universe, as far as I'm concerned, where you would throw that dream body. Might as well get in touch with it, become friends with it, and eventually become one with your dream body. That's right. We're going to learn how to become one with our dream bodies. But it's not the only thing that we can do with the dream bodies. For example, on some occasions, it's okay to have certain separation between the dream body and a physical body. For instance, when you're sleeping and dreaming, your dream body goes on an adventure while your sleeping body is resting in bed or wherever you sleep. What also happens is sometimes, even in waking life, we may experience bilocation, the condition where the dream body and physical body are not located in the same physical spot. So in other words, the dream body can actually separate from the physical body, even during the daily life. On some occasions, it leads to fainting and not being conscious in the physical body, while the dream body experiences what it does. On some other occasions, it happens when the physical body is not completely unconscious, but it's in distress. So for example, out-of-body experiences occur spontaneously to people who go through misadventure of sorts. For example, a car accident, or a physical assault, or sexual assault, or some other misadventure. Essentially, an out-of-body experience can be understood as an event where the dream body separates from the physical body spontaneously. Most people experience spontaneously because they don't try to or don't even think that it's possible to facilitate such a separation. It is possible, and we have certain methods for that, but it's not something that we particularly pursue as a primary objective on our journey, because there are more benefits to integrating the dream body with the physical body than to separating them. But I don't want to say that separation is a bad thing and should be banished or prevented from happening. what we do is we learn under which circumstances the dream body actually becomes more active than the physical body. And under those circumstances, the dream body may actually take charge. For example, if a person is completely knocked out, unconscious, the dream body may take charge, but if it's never been developed, it's not going to be very efficient in its actions. In other words, its actions are going to be powerless. If the dream body it hasn't been developed energetically, it's disempowered or weak. Many people don't really have any idea about the dream body in terms of where are its limbs, or how does it hold itself, or what does it do when my physical body is relaxing, sleeping, or being knocked out. People also experience out-of-body experiences when going through surgeries. Now, that may give us an idea that it is possible to induce an out-of-body experience, because a person going through surgery is drugged with an anesthetic. So there are certain anesthetics, for instance ketamine, that are well known for inducing out-of-body experiences. And there are also other drugs that can be used for the exact same purpose. One of the things that we recognize is that altered states of consciousness induced by certain drugs or by certain events in our lives can trigger those out-of-body experiences. In other words, the dream body can split up from the physical body. But in most cases, during our daily life, our dream body and the physical body are more or less localized together. Now, the funny thing about it is that there are some pros and cons to that. The dream body, also referred to as pain body by Eckhart Tolle and numerous followers of his, has tendency to wreak havoc in our health or simply create misalignments in the physical body for the exact same reason I just mentioned a few minutes ago. For the reason of having certain psychological traits or beliefs or identity statements that are not particularly healthy. And when that happens, the dream body turns into a pain body, and basically we start experiencing discomfort and pain. What does it mean? It means that there is a certain misalignment that is associated with a certain emotional struggle against the flow. What does struggle against the flow mean? It means we are not feeling the flow, or we don't trust the flow, or we think that our flow should go this way, and if the flow of things is not going this way, then heck with it, we're going to make it go this way anyway. And another thing that we often end up doing is simply being oblivious. And then we are bombarded by a variety of influences from the media, from the society, our friends, family, and they pull us in different directions. The more we're being pulled in a variety of different directions, the more we feel like we fall apart. If you haven't felt like you're falling apart, you probably met some people who express that attitude or even use the same words to say how they feel. People feel like they're falling apart when they have a lot of conflicting values and beliefs and identity statements. And what we do in our practice is learn how to synergize them. Instead of trying to get rid of certain aspects of identity that are bad, we actually learn to integrate them and to recognize that yes, there are some beliefs that are more accurate than others. For example, believing in flat earth may be a rather inaccurate belief system. Believing that a certain race of people is more important than another race, also perhaps inaccurate. What happens when we adhere to certain inaccurate beliefs. We actually perceive the world through the filters of perception that distort our reality. And this distorted reality is perceived as the norm. We basically consider that this is how things are, even though our perception is distorted, and so we are being misinformed or disinformed by our perception. Not only do we perceive things through filters, we also project energies through filters as well. What I mean by that is that when we perceive things through a certain filter, it triggers certain reactions or response if you are responsive. But then when we act using same windows of perception and we end up being stuck in a particular paradigm or realm of existence, what that leads to? It leads to believing that this is how things are, and also believing that we are the way that we happen to be. And if reality confirms that we are supposed to be this way, then there is no incentive or no reason for us to try to be in any other way. In other words, we get stuck or paralyzed in a particular identity. When it happens, we are not using our resources fully. We're not running our engine on all the cylinders, so to speak. We end up operating only on a fraction of the energy that's available to us, and also we perceive the world in a very polarized, limited, and truncated manner. What that leads to is it leads to living a truncated life. It also physically affects our health, because if we're stuck in a particular realm of consciousness, it manifests somatically in the form of a particular holding pattern. You've heard me mentioning holding patterns for a long, long time, and we come back to them because they allow us to understand how the physical body embodies certain mental states. But beyond mental states, we also recognize that there is a wider realm of consciousness that may integrate more than one state. So what we do is we develop a mind map. Imagine that you are inside of an energy bubble, but now rather than looking at this energy bubble as just a bubble surrounding you from all sides, let's take a look at it as if you are inside of a globe. That's right, a globe with a map of the world on it. But it's a translucent globe. So you can actually see different continents and different parts of the globe, different countries occupying certain parts of the continents. There are oceans here, there are islands there, and you develop the ability to recognize that there are certain countries or certain states. That's why we use the word states. The states of consciousness associated with particular parts of this energy bubble. When you get into a particular mental state, it is also reflected in your perception being localized to a particular area on the globe. When that happens, you are likely to experience things through the filter associated with that part of your energy bubble. Now, there are different filters associated with different parts of the bubble that you will discover as you start composing your mind map. And this mind map essentially is the way to expand first in 2 dimensions. The idea is about different states of consciousness and different ways of thinking, and perhaps in different identities that you may step into, or fly a different flag, so to speak, or wear a different hat, if you were. And depending on the circumstances, some of them work better and some don't work so well. So for example, if you put a hat of a businessman while trying to protect yourself from an attack of a robber. That's not going to go well because you're not using the energy that would be appropriate for dealing with being robbed. If, for instance, you're dealing with a business meeting in a way that you would deal with robbery, that would also not go well, probably because you would be using radically different energy from the energy needed to be used in the business meeting. So what happens when business meetings or political meetings or just meetings of friends and family trigger certain energies that are not suitable for that set of circumstances? Well, they definitely not go well, or they go awry. And when they go awry, we feel like we're struggling or we're not in the flow. What would we be able to do if we were paying attention to the flow? We would recognize that different circumstances in life require using different energies. And so we would actually put the appropriate hat, the hat that matches the set of circumstances that we find ourselves in. When we do that, things go much smoother. We operate on the same frequency as other people involved, or we function much better. In other words, we meet the requirements of that particular moment in our lives. We step up to the plate to deal with the situation in the most effective and efficient manner. Wouldn't it be great to do it all the time? It would be. But we have certain hang-ups. We have certain stereotypes of thinking or unconscious fears and other attitudes and beliefs that affect our ability to smoothly flow with the flow of things, with the Tao. Instead of flowing with the Tao, we often tend to struggle against the flow. We already looked at some of the reasons why we tend to do that, so let's see how we do it. Well, in most cases we begin by tensing up. We begin by contracting the muscles in our bodies to shape ourselves in a person whose hat we're wearing, to match the sense of identity that we either get used to or we think would be the most appropriate here. And if it is appropriate, that's great. If it is not, then our attention is undue. In other words, we suffer from unnecessary tension. We suffer from consequences of the tension, such as energy blockages, that of course also block the flow of qi to internal organs and other energy centers in the body, and that of course leads to health problems on the one hand. On the other hand, it also limits our mobility and range of motion and flexibility, so we become prone to injuries. And if we are exposed to any type of contact sports or happen to be involved in any type of accident or an incident where we may get hurt, we often get hurt in that part of the body that was holding tension. That's one of the reasons why people, for instance, in martial arts, often get injured in the same pattern, on the same area of the body. If they get injured over and over again in the same place, what does it tell you about that place? It probably tells you that it's not a strong part of their body. It is the area of weakness where the opponent's fist being drawn into. And just quite literally getting injured over and over again in the same place. Or you may sprain the same ankle over and over again. Why would it happen? Well, obviously that ankle isn't in alignment. So if you look at the knee of that leg and toes of that foot, I bet they're out of alignment. Why are they out of alignment? Because there is tension. Why is there tension? It's associated with a particular pattern of holding tension. And most likely it's going to be holding out pattern where there is an even distribution of weight between the right and left legs. Does it lead to being prone to being injured on one side more than the other? You bet. And what happens as a result of that? We basically solidify our perception that we think that now I'm the person who gets injured easily in this particular manner all the time. So we basically give ourselves the permission unconsciously to keep doing that. What if we, instead of solidifying that sense of identity, that I'm a person with, I keep injuring that ankle all the time, what if we developed a different sense of identity? Well, that would require changing our beliefs. That would require changing our sense of who we are. How do we do that? We would have to re-examine our values. We would have to go through the list of our values and beliefs and quite literally demote some of them, or maybe even replace them with other values and beliefs, in case some of the values or beliefs that we used to hold on to prove to be inadequate or deficient. If we stick with inaccurate or deficient beliefs, no wonder we will be continuing to suffer, because we simply delude ourselves and live in a delusion. And that's exactly what Buddha Shakyamuni was referring to as the world of samsara. He called it the world of illusion. Well, I use a slightly stronger term, the world of delusion, because it's not only illusory world that we live in, but we continue deluding ourselves as to the true nature of it. What would happen if we stopped doing that? What would happen if we developed a more accurate belief system and system of values? Well, that would mean that our values are no longer conflicting with each other. We're not being pulled in different directions all the time. It also would mean that our beliefs stop distort our perception of things around us and within us as much. There may be still some distortion, but at least there is greater accuracy. There is greater clarity. When there is more clarity, guess what happens? We actually experience the ability to both understand things better, connect the dots between the cause and effect, and connecting the dots is the opposite of ignorance. Ignorance of karma, which Buddha Shakyamuni always talked about being the main cause of suffering. If you don't understand cause and effect, you don't understand the law of karma, you basically are going to continue causing yourself and other living beings a bunch of suffering. Now, if we understand the law of cause and effect, we connect the dots, we see clearly where we are and where we're going. We also develop the ability to communicate more clearly with others. What would that do? Well, that means that our communication also is not tainted by those same layers of filters of perception that tends to destroy most people's communication style. Most people have difficulty expressing themselves authentically. Most people have difficulty speaking the truth. What happens when we don't speak the truth? Somewhere in the back of our minds, we have sense of guilt for lying. And that guilt causes a particular holding pattern. What would that be? That's right. It would be holding down. Now, if the person holds down, are they going to suffer from any pain in their bodies? Of course, they're going to be suffering from a fair degree of pain or discomfort in their bodies because they are misaligned. Now, when we work with pain body, we recognize that it's not enough to just shorten the muscles, let them lengthen, straighten the spine, get the person into a centered state, because they won't stay that way, or they simply will revert back to the habitual way of being if they have not addressed the deeper identity of theirs. They have not been working on their own identity. The person who works on their own identity begins to understand that what they used to identify with perhaps wasn't working for them so well. Well, maybe some aspects of that identity were fine, and some others perhaps leave room for improvement. What happens then? They need to start exploring alternatives. That's why we study different holding patterns. That's why we study different states of consciousness associated with them. We also need to continue this process. We need to continue exploring different states of identity that would be associated with different holding patterns and map them out. Because when we have those mapped out, then we can develop strategies. Most people have unconscious strategies for struggling against the flow of things. What we do is we develop our own authentic strategies for flowing with the flow of things. And if we do go against the flow, we do this consciously. And we do this for only as long as we need to experience discomfort or suffering so that we learn whatever we need to learn. That's right. Learning is hard to come by without some degree of discomfort. If we not only experience physical discomfort, but we also associate it with certain story about ourselves, then it of course becomes a pattern of suffering. We actually need to experience suffering in order to recognize that most of the time it's not something that's done to us. By and large, it's what we do to ourselves. And that means it's up to us to keep suffering or to quit suffering. Just like with tension, just like with pain, with suffering we also do the same thing. We exaggerate it a little bit. How much do we need to exaggerate our suffering? Well, I don't suggest to cause ourselves too much suffering. So we need to find the sweet spot or the boundary beyond which you don't need to push yourself. But it's okay to explore the edges of the comfort zone in regard to suffering. What that's going to do, it's going to move you from one island or from one state to another state or another continent even on that mind map. When you start exploring alternatives, when you face suffering and you start exploring alternatives, how else can I handle this? Or how else can I perceive this? Or what else would it possibly mean? That's when you start traveling along the surface of your energy bubble, entering different states of consciousness and exploring alternative ways of being, which means if you actually consciously do this, you can consciously develop a new sense of identity. If you develop a new sense of identity that is associated with different altered state of consciousness, it will also manifest as an altered holding pattern. You will not be holding yourself the same way. Now, does it mean that the new holding pattern is going to be better than the old one? Maybe. Under some circumstances it may work better. But you don't want to get stuck in the new one either. You want to continue exploring. So what we do then is we develop the skill of association with a particular pattern that works, and dissociation and moving on. When you associate with the holding pattern or with a state of consciousness or with a sense of identity, you basically become more solid. Your dream body and your physical body become more integrated. When you dissociate, it's almost like you look at yourself from a third party's perspective, or I often use the term looking at yourself from a point of view of a fly on a wall. This kind of dissociation happens when the physical body and the dream body split or become less firmly associated. So they become dissociated. And some people experience this without fainting, so they may kind of develop the ability to perceive themselves from the third party's perspective and still be functional. In that case, that means that your dream body isn't taking up all your energy. If you separate your dream body from the physical body, and there is more energy being taken by the dream body, so less is left for the physical body to function. Physical body will not be very functional. It will either collapse or faint, fall asleep. Either way, you will be basically operating mostly from a standpoint of the dream body. When that happens, you actually have tremendous level of freedom that most people can only dream of. That's right. When you are experiencing an out-of-body experience like this, or if you even go through a near-death experience, your dream body basically becomes a new self. You begin to identify with it. But it's very difficult to consciously identify with the dream body if you don't even know that it exists. It's really hard to fathom whatever happened if you're not doing this consciously on purpose. That's why people may even experience some degree of enlightenment when they have a near-death experience or actually go through the death experience and die. They may experience an awakening moment, but it doesn't last very long. They get confused or they simply get lost. In other words, the experience isn't translated into anything that can be comprehended consciously or communicated to others. These incomprehensible spiritual awakenings still have value to them. It's just simply we can't put them to good use in our daily lives. So if you want to bring awakening into your daily life and benefit from becoming more awake, more enlightened, well, this is the practice that I invite you to start exploring. The practice of associating and dissociating from the physical body at will. How do you associate with the physical body at will? I use adventures, adventure sports, adventure travel. I use martial arts. Whether I'm rock climbing or paragliding, whitewater rafting or scuba diving or skydiving, that only gives me an impetus to become more associated with the physical body, because if I don't associate with the physical body, if I become dissociated, physical body will be less functional and likely to get injured or killed. So that would turn an adventure into a misadventure. The same happens in the context of martial arts. You have to be thoroughly associated, at least for a moment, because you may get hurt or killed by an attack of an opponent. In the context of martial arts training, you may not get exposed to that level of danger. You're not going to get permanently damaged or killed, but you perform the way you train. So if you want to learn being capable of dealing with any type of challenges that life may throw your way, you also need to train realistically. We start with a relatively slow motion, but then we start speeding up. At the level of elemental air practice, we can go full speed without having to hold back. If we hold back, it's only because we have some degree of compassion. Now, holding back is also another holding pattern, the opposite of holding forth. Holding forth is often the pattern associated with aggression or anger, but also may be an expression of curiosity or passion. Holding back is essentially an attempt to subdue passion or perhaps remove yourself from a conflict or not get engaged in some dynamics that you feel not comfortable with, or you simply have judgment about something or someone and you hold back. Now, when that happens, you are not going to be able to perform martial arts training very well, unless you need to do a lot of backward pulls. So we can see that most of the situations in the context of martial arts or any type of human confrontation requires a specific holding pattern. That's holding forth. And if we end up holding back, that's usually going to lead to poor results. If we understand that different circumstances in life require different holding patterns, that sometimes we may train ourselves to get into those holding patterns at will and identify with that way of being. But we need to remember that we don't want to get stuck in it. And that's when we use dissociation. So for example, if you got into holding forth pattern, practicing martial arts, and then you choose to snap out of it, how do you do that? Well, you dissociate. You no longer perceive yourself as the person who's in danger or who needs to defend themselves or somebody who they love. You don't have to fight. Basically, snapping out of it is a form of dissociation. You may also observe the situation from a third party's perspective, a fly on a wall or a bird's eye point of view, so to speak, to see what are the lessons that I could learn from this dynamics or from this scenario. If there are any challenges, almost always there are some lessons to be learned. If you do this in a moment when you're being punched, it's likely you're going to get punched out. So I don't recommend dissociating at the time when you need to get seriously associated. That's unfortunately what a lot of people do. They dissociate at exactly the wrong time when they're being threatened or assaulted or experience some kind of potential trauma or accident. Instead of dissociating at that moment, we actually need to associate and function as fully as we can. Then we snap out of it and see, okay, so what is it that I can learn from this? Or in the big picture, in a larger schema of things, so to speak. What are the lessons that I can learn from this? What is it that I can do about these lessons so that perhaps I don't repeat this over and over again? And it may apply to repeating the same situation even in the context of the same encounter. For example, you have a martial arts challenge coming at you and somebody's punching you. And if the person is punching you the same way more than twice, that's a pattern. Can you learn from that? Can you develop a certain alternative way of dealing with it as compared to what you had done the first couple of punches? The same also can be done in not only physical altercations, but also verbal dialogue or communication. So for example, if you're negotiating with someone, can you negotiate from a slightly different point of view than the point of view that you are used to identifying with? Now, that would require some dissociation from your old point of view or old identity and move to a new identity, associate with that one, then perhaps dissociate again to see, okay, how is it working out? If it's working out, great, let's associate again and let's continue this negotiations from this perspective. If it's not working, great, let's dissociate and move on and explore some alternatives. And so basically that potentially gives us an ability to match the perspective of another person. If the other person has a certain perspective and you have a certain perspective, the greater there's discrepancy between these perspectives, the greater there's going to be a clash. But if one's perspective is coming from this particular vantage point and you move over and assume a similar perspective, so you basically are looking at things from a similar vantage point, guess what's going to happen? You discover alignment. The more you are in alignment with another person, the less there's going to be friction, the less there's going to be discomfort or disagreement. That's something that we do in the context of business communications, of mediation, or any type of family dynamics that sometimes arise and need to be resolved. It's also something that we do in the context of Tantric Qigong. That's right. We need to learn how to get along with our Tantric partners. And if we don't, well, they won't be our Tantric partners for long. Or there's going to be a lot of discord in that partnership. But if we find ways to align ourselves with our partner, at least temporarily, something really cool is going to happen. There's going to be very little friction. That's what we call resonance. And we can resonate with each other, and we can also experience greater degree of accomplishment together because we synergize our energies. So basically that means two people can achieve more than one person if they are in unison, if they're working in resonance with each other. But what kind of accomplishment or achievement am I talking about? Well, we all have dreams. We all have certain aspirations, don't we? I'm talking about manifesting your dreams. If your dreams and dreams of your tantric or practice partner are similar, then manifestation of those dreams would be an example of such accomplishment. My perception of Tantric Qigong is that it's the practice of creating mutually empowering and mutually enlightening relationships. So enlightenment also would be another example of a major accomplishment. And as I always talk about enlightenment, that it's not a destination, it's a journey. Becoming more and more enlightened together would be a great accomplishment or a proof positive that you're on the right track. As two practice partners, or two tantric partners, find that they are less and less stuck in their habitual identity, and they're more fluid and more flexible, then they can also explore the movement in one way or another along the map of their minds together. That's right. They can shift together, for example, from being bitter or concerned or freaked out to some alternative state of consciousness, for example, where they can experience greater cohesion or greater love or greater understanding. Together, we can also experience out-of-body experiences or dream experiences. That's something that I will dedicate our next webinar to, but this is an opportunity for me to give you a little bit of heads up that we're going to dive into the exploration of mutual dreaming process. And this is something that is going to be quite enlightening for you, and I believe will also create quite a bit of momentum for your own personal enlightenment. Now, if you have any questions or any comments about what we've done, what we've explored, what we've studied, don't hesitate to contact me or ask those questions during your private coaching sessions. Until then, namaste.